Hello everyone. For today's topic, I'm going to be speaking with you about Kaddish, literally holy. This is a prayer which is recited throughout our services and will be familiar to most people who worship in any synagogue. The Kaddish actually has four different kinds. There is the Kaddish called the Chatzi Kaddish, which is the half Kaddish that separates between prayers. There's the Kaddish Titkabal, which is the Kaddish which is said at the end of saying an Amidah, one of the silent or standing prayers. And then you have the Kaddish Yatom, or the Kaddish Alem, the whole or the mourner's Kaddish, which is said often at the end of the service. And then there's a fourth Kaddish called the Kaddish de Rabbanan, the rabbi's Kaddish, which is said after studying a portion of Torah, or after, shall we say, doing some reading, biblical readings or rabbinic readings in the service. And those Kaddishim are not all recited by the same person. The first two Kaddishim are always said by the Chazan, by the person leading the prayers, while the second two, the Kaddish Shalem or Yatom, or the Kaddish de Rabbanan, is typically said by someone who is a Yatom, someone who is in their year of mourning. And that's the usual way that this is carried out within Bevis Marks. It's different than what you find in some other synagogues where it might be limited to one person saying it or people have to stand together. Here, people say it wherever it is that they are located within the synagogue. There are, however, a number of differences that one finds within Bevis Marks. The first thing that one will notice that during the Kaddish, everybody is seated except for those who are reciting the Kaddish. This is something which is common among Sephardim, while Ashkenazim typically have everybody stand out of respect for such a holy prayer. So what's the reason that the Spanish and Portuguese sit during Kaddish? Well, it's a way of distinguishing between those who are the mourners and those who are not. And so the mourners are standing when they say the Kaddish, but in order that, shall we say, one isn't mixed up or thought, oh, is that person in mourning, you sit down. Everybody else will sit down. And therefore, within our synagogue, we're trying to be quite strict that if somebody comes in, even if they're from a different synagogue where they're used to standing their Kaddish, here, because it's only the mourners who stand during those prayers, we will ask that you be seated so that one shouldn't, shall we say, God forbid, consider someone who's not in mourning to actually be in mourning and for, in a sense, to somehow be a bad omen. The other thing which is interesting or different among the Spanish and Portuguese here is that we have a practice that on Shabbat, ideally, mourners don't recite the Kaddish. There is an idea that on Shabbat and festivals, one isn't supposed to, shall we say, display public mourning, and therefore there is the custom that mourners don't say the Kaddish on Shabbat. However, things have evolved a little bit here at Bevis Marks, where we have a bit of a balance, where we do permit people who are mourners to say the Kaddish, but the way that we do it without, shall we say, fully interrupting the original tradition is we still have the reader recite it as well. So typically during the week, if there's a mourner's Kaddish, simply the mourners get up and they say the Kaddish and the reader will remain silent. However, on Shabbat, because originally it would have been only the reader saying the Kaddish, we still have the reader recite it, even though the mourners may be reciting it along with the reader. We've thankfully been able to restore the minhag to some extent. Now on Friday nights and on weekday Rosh Chodesh, we've been able to ensure that the Avelim, the mourners, don't say the Kaddish at times when they're not supposed to. It's been a little bit easier to restore the minhag in that context because there are times on those occasions when the Avelim still can say the Kaddish. on Friday. And of course, they can say the Kaddish just before the Arbit, before the evening service. And even on Rosh Chodesh during the week, there's additional psukim that are said, verses that are said at the end of the service, and the Avelim can say the mourner's Kaddish at that point. And so we've been able to, shall we say, protect the parts where the Avelim are not supposed to do it and restore the minhag while still having the possibility for Avelim to say the Kaddish, which is, of course, important. Shabbat has been a bit trickier on Shabbat mornings because the time when Avelim can say Kaddish on Shabbat morning is during Zemirot, in a sense before the regular part of the service begins, when it's not considered, shall we say, to be public mourning. However, because that's a bit early and at times maybe even before the minyan has arrived, the custom has, or the practice has persisted for the mourners to still say the Kaddish at the end, even though really, according to the minhag, they shouldn't. The way we've tried to balance it is, or particularly for those who are sensitive to it, is that when the reader is saying the Kaddish, and the reader still will say the Kaddish, the mourners will say it simply quietly along with him. And in fact, when the Society of Heshaim, who publishes our prayer books, published their most recent Shabbat morning book, I made sure that it continued to say the reader says Kaddish, and not to inadvertently change the minhag by saying mourners now say Kaddish. So the prayer book still says it should be the readers saying it, even if it so happens that some of the mourners are reciting it quietly along with them. In this way, we've been able to try to nudge things back to the original minhag while still being respectful of the fact that there are mourners who do want to say the Kaddish, and trying to strike that right balance. It's probably been the practice here for decades, if not generations, that mourners have been doing that. So it's not always so easy to just very quickly change things, but little by little we've been working towards restoring the minhag as much as possible. In both of these ways, in both of these things we've just talked about, you find some differences with other Spanish and Portuguese communities. For example, in New York, they're still very strict that nobody who's in mourning recites Kaddish on Shabbat and festivals, end of story. However, they do have the practice that during the Kaddish, everybody stands, which is different than what you typically would find within Spanish and Portuguese communities. And so you see that in different S&P synagogues, there has been, shall we say, an evolution at times on how exactly these things are done. The one custom which sometimes has a bit of controversy is whether at the end of reading the Torah, when we say the half Kaddish, who recites that. So in some Sephardic communities, when you have a mourner who's had the final call up to the Torah, the Aliyah, they are then permitted to say that half Kaddish. Within the Spanish and Portuguese, originally that was not the tradition. The person reading the Sefer, the person reading the Torah, they recite that Kaddish, regardless of who else is on the teba, on the reader's desk. I know that in some Spanish and Portuguese communities, they have allowed mourners to say that half Kaddish, as is the practice with other Sephardic communities. But here at Bevis Marks, where we try our best to retain the original tradition, we still always have the reader recite that Kaddish. Most importantly, the Kaddish is a very significant prayer, and it is recited with different melodies on different occasions. And one can, shall we say, know what the occasion is simply by listening to that melody. So typically we'll say, Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, and that's just a regular Kaddish. But other times you'll have other melodies where we'll say, Yitkadal v'yitkadash. And without going through all of them, one will find lots of different melodies of the Kaddish, whether it's Shabbat, whether it's the high holidays, whether it's the Shabbat before Rosh Chodesh, before the new month, or whether it is some other significant occasion. And so there's quite a lot that, shall we say, put into the Kaddish. It is a prayer that resonates. It's a prayer that focuses on God's holiness, on the divine, our connection to the divine. And it is something which has great resonance for people in mourning as a way to connect with God during a time where they may be feeling a bit distant. And it is a way of, shall we say, bringing the community together, because everybody responds to the Kaddish in unison. And so it may only be recited by one person or by a group of people. Everybody joins together in that prayer. And so it's a very unifying type of prayer. While some prayers are, shall we say, just individually, this, everyone does the responses out loud together. And so it really creates a very beautiful and special moment. And so that's just a bit about the Kaddish as it's done in the Spanish and Portuguese, particularly here at Bevis Marks. And I look forward to seeing you next time when we talk about some more of the minhagim, the customs of the Western Sephardim. Thank you.